So many women are refusing to have children that it is actually a global crisis affecting all of humanity. Birth rates are collapsing all across the developed world, and nobody wants to admit the real reason why. It has nothing to do with the cost of living. It has nothing to do with economic anxiety or people being afraid for the future. The real reason is a lot more simple than that, but it's also a lot worse. The reason birth rates are declining is because women are refusing to have children. Birth rates all across the world are hitting record lows. The global fertility rate is currently at 2.2 children per woman, which is barely above the replacement level of 2.1. But most developed nations are already well below the replacement level. The fertility rate in the United States is currently 1.6 births per woman, and in South Korea, which has the lowest birth rate in the world, women give birth to an average of 0.7 children over the course of their lifetime. Those numbers are catastrophically low. Not just because low birth rates lead to a rapidly aging population with relatively few working age people to support the economy, but these extremely low birth rates are catastrophic because of what they reveal about modern society. See, the motivation to reproduce is biological. It's part of human nature. If there was a man and a woman somehow surviving together out in the wilderness from the time they were born, okay, so imagine these people are completely feral, they don't know anything about society, they were abandoned at birth, so they've never had anyone to teach them anything. Well, that man and woman would almost certainly end up reproducing. It's just that fundamental a process. It's basically instinct. Men and women both have an innate natural desire to do things together that result in passing on their DNA. So it seems odd that now, at a time when human society is the most connected it's ever been, and more people than ever live in urban environments, in close proximity to thousands of other people, now is the time when birth rates are falling through the floor. So obviously, something's happening that is causing birth rates to decline so rapidly, and it's not men. Women are the ones that control reproduction. So if women choose to not have kids, or if they delay having kids for long enough that they're physically not able to have kids by the time they do decide to do so, then the birth rate will decline. And that is exactly what we're seeing now. Fewer and fewer women are choosing to have children. So why? Do women not want to have kids anymore? Or is it something else? Well, it's kind of complicated. I think women largely do still want to have kids, but they don't want to have kids with the men that are willing to commit to them. There's a huge gap between the average woman's standards for the potential father of her children and the actual men that she has available to her. So that's one thing. Another factor at play here is that every girl growing up in Western society for the past 50 years has had it constantly drilled into her head that being independent and pursuing a career is the definition of success. Prior to this relatively recent brainwashing campaign, or social norm, whatever you want to call it, for the entire length of human history up until very recently, the standard of success for a woman was having children and raising children. That's what it meant to live a good life as a woman. But along with the overwhelming success of the feminist revolution, the old standards became taboo. Everybody started to believe that having children was a form of oppression, that childbirth and staying at home with the kids was just a tool of the patriarchy. It's something to be avoided, not celebrated. So historically, motherhood was always something that women aspired toward. And that is natural. It is a natural biological impulse. But it was also a standard that was baked into our culture. So girls learned their role early on in life, just as men learned their role. And this was the same throughout literally every culture that ever existed, by the way. Modern Western society, which I do extend to Japan and South Korea, modern society is unique in that it is the first ever society with anti-natalism baked into the culture. Girls grow up learning that while, yes, they do have the choice to become a mother if that's what they choose to do, but motherhood is also always framed in a negative light. Because motherhood isn't usually framed as a choice, it's framed as the opposite. The orthodoxy in our antinatalist feminist society states that motherhood is something that happens to women when they are not allowed to have freedom of choice. So, yeah, sure, girls are taught that they can choose their own path, with motherhood being a valid option, but at the same time, motherhood is also seen as the result of a failure to exercise your freedom of choice. And freedom and independence, freedom of choice, these are the highest virtues in modern Western society. So females today are raised in a culture that says that if you are virtuous and you exercise your freedom to choose, then the result might be that you're a single childless woman with a high-paying, fulfilling career. Or the result might be that you're a mother and you take care of the house and you raise your kids and all that. But if you're a failure and you fail to live up to that highest virtue, freedom of choice, then the result is always that you end up being a stay-at-home mother. Okay, so do you see what I'm saying? Women are told they can live life however they want, but at the same time, being a mother is seen as the default punishment for failing to be a good person. So, obviously, most women growing up in this society are going to feel discouraged from making the choice to be a mother. Even though that is theoretically a valid option, it's associated with failure. And nobody wants to be seen as a failure. Ultimately, the biggest culprit here is that society holds freedom of choice as the highest virtue for a woman, while at the same time defining success in terms of a woman's ability to live independently. But that's not the only reason why fertility rates are crashing through the floor. I mean, social pressure can go a long way, but so can basic biology. And biologically speaking, women tend to have a natural imperative to have children and to nurture them. But there's a problem with the biology. See, just like men are naturally wired to spread their seed as far and wide as they possibly can, women are naturally wired to seek out the best possible man to provide for her and her children. And that all makes sense in a historical context when people lived in relatively small, tight-knit communities. But nowadays, in our globally connected, monolithic society, where everybody has internet access in their pocket at all times, women have a much larger pool of men from which to select that quote-unquote best possible mate to provide her with her children. So women's brains are being overloaded with all these giga-chad alpha male pretty boys they see flexing on Instagram, and they're being overloaded with hundreds or even thousands of guys messaging them on the dating apps. The inevitable result is that women's standards get very inflated, because any average-looking woman will easily have dozens of highly attractive men just filling her up with praise, love bombing her, just making her feel special, making her feel tingly inside. But those guys are just trying to get some, more often than not. They are not usually willing to commit to raising children with a woman just because they want to hook up with her. So women can end up getting these super hyper inflated standards, and they only want to even consider talking to a guy if he meets those inflated standards, because, of course, if she lowered her standards for a guy, that would mean she's forfeiting her freedom of choice. If she has to settle for a guy that isn't her choice, then that's bad. That's not her ideal choice. And freedom of choice is the highest virtue. So women's standards get super inflated. Their standards are through the roof. So the average woman ends up just not being willing to settle for any of the many men that would gladly support her and provide for her and her children, because none of those men meet her standards. So there's a lot of women that just don't want to have kids because either they're afraid to go against the status quo, or maybe they are a true believer in the whole freedom of choice as a virtue concept. Then there's also the fact that, on average, women's standards for the quality of men they can successfully attract for the purposes of marriage are very inflated, just completely unrealistic. Because just because a man will treat you like a princess for a week, just so he can smash one time, does not mean that same man will commit to you for a lifetime. So women's expectations are just all the way out of line with the reality of who their actual options are. So the situation is bleak. I know there are plenty of men that also don't want to have kids, but it's just not to the same degree. And ultimately, women are the gatekeepers of reproduction. It is women that ultimately decide to either bear children or not. But if you don't believe me, there is some data to suggest that men do place more value on having children than women do. That same data also suggests that for both sexes, having more conservative-leaning views is correlated with a stronger desire to have children. And as I'm sure you know, men tend to be more conservative than women do. In a 2024 poll conducted by Pew Research, childless men and women under the age of 35 were asked whether or not they'd like to have children someday in the future. 57% of the men responded that indeed they do want to have children someday, but only 45% of the women said that they'd want to have kids someday. So, yeah, it's obviously not men that are causing these low birth rates. The ongoing fertility crisis is the direct result of women's choices. Now, I'm not saying that women shouldn't have all the rights they have now, but if women en masse continue to forego motherhood in favor of their career ambitions, or just because their dream guy doesn't want to commit to them, that's going to be a problem. It already is a problem, but it's only going to be getting worse. And by the way, if you think I'm wrong about women's freedom of choice being the cause of this birth rate crisis, check this out. Here's a map of the world showing how each country ranks in terms of women's rights. Feel free to look up more information on this, but basically all you need to know is countries in green are considered to be more free for women, while countries in red are horrible for women's rights. Okay, so green good, red bad. You know the deal. Okay, now let's take a look at this map depicting fertility rates across the globe. Pretty darn similar, huh? I mean, it's basically the same map, but with the colors inverted. Now, the obvious argument some people will make here is they'll say, well, women's rights are correlated with the wealth of a nation, yada yada, material conditions, prosperity, whatever. So the argument would be that what's happening is just that wealthier nations tend to have better women's rights records, and they also tend to have lower fertility rates. Because it is true that the wealth of a nation does correlate with both of those things. But it just seems obvious to me that the actual chain of causation here is first, a nation gets wealthy. Second, women gain all sorts of freedoms in that nation. Then, because of those freedoms, women are then able to fully control reproduction and the fertility rate collapses. That's how it actually works. It is women's freedom of choice that results in low birth rates. And we know that's got to be the case because they brag about it. I don't know if you've noticed, but some women are proud of the declining birth rates. They say it's just natural selection and it's a good thing. Of course, these are also the same people that say that the men that are being weeded out of the gene pool deserve it because they're hateful or they're misogynistic or maybe they're just too lazy to take a shower or, a whole host of other straw man arguments. Even if what's going on now was a form of natural selection, I don't know why that would mean it's necessarily a good thing, but I think that's just as far as some people's logic goes. They just think, it's sort of like natural selection what's going on. It is natural selection. Well, natural selection is science, and I trust science. Always trust the science. Science is good. So if it's science, then that means it's a good thing. I mean, it's just such a kindergarten way of looking at things. But these people, really, they're just hateful. That's really all there is to it. If somebody is rejoicing at the idea of millions of men never being able to pass on their DNA, despite the fact that there is no shortage of available women, then that person is just a hateful person. Just imagine if the roles were switched. If millions of men were refusing to reproduce, despite most of the women wanting to reproduce with them. Can you imagine? It would be like the Me Too movement times 100. Every war going on in the world would have to pause temporarily so we could figure out a solution. Obama would probably tweet about it. The mainstream reaction would obviously be to say that all the men refusing to reproduce are all evil misogynists, and society is on the brink of total ruin, all because these men want to have their cake and eat it too, and they're just selfish. And you know what? Anybody having that reaction would be 100% correct. They would be right to have that reaction. That is how a sane society should react when half the population is refusing to participate. But that's not the reaction that our society is currently having, because women have the halo effect. It is a female-first society we live in. So no matter what the issue is, men are the ones that get blamed. You got one side saying that men just need to man up and stop being losers and get in shape and get a real job and start making money and just man up, and then they'll be able to find a girlfriend. Then on the other side, they say men just got to stop being such creeps. Men just need to learn to respect women, and then they can easily find a girlfriend. The gaslighting is really out of hand on this issue. And like I say, it's coming from every direction. The only people that care about men being chronically single is chronically single men. We have absolutely no allies. Nobody's going to bat for us. That's one of the reasons that I make these videos, actually. Nobody is advocating for single men. Obviously, it's not much, just me talking into the mic to an audience of, I'm guessing 90% of you watching this are in a similar situation. So I know I'm preaching to the choir, but this does need to be said, so I guess I'm the one doing it. So many women are refusing to have children that it is actually a global crisis affecting all of humanity. And the main reason they refuse is just because most men don't meet the average woman's minimum requirements. And they try to say the problem is that men aren't doing their duty and stepping up and being man enough or whatever to provide for women, as if every lonely man is just living the neat life in his mom's basement. They're the ones not doing their duty, okay? They're the ones not stepping up. Men are not the problem here. Unfortunately, I really don't see the birth rate turning around at this point. People like to say the fertility rates will all go up as soon as the economy gets better and the cost of living goes down or whatever, but like I say, I really don't think that has anything to do with it. And also, I don't think the cost of living, like that cat's out of the bag. The cost of living is not gonna ever be more affordable than it is now. I really don't think so. But I don't think that even affects the fertility rate much, if any, at all. You know, it's just not a matter of people not being able to afford kids. That's not the problem. And in fact, I'm pretty sure some of the main demographics that are still actually having kids at replacement level, those are some of the less wealthy demographics. And obviously, globally, the nations with the highest birth rates are all poor nations, like African nations. So I don't think economic anxiety is the issue here. Freedom of choice is the driving factor behind the decline. To put it plainly, most women do not want to reproduce with most men. It's a problem of inflated egos and unrealistic expectations. That's the problem. That is the problem we are facing. And I don't see any solution. I really don't. But if you enjoyed this video, please check out some of my other videos. I have lots of videos on this channel where I talk about male loneliness, and sometimes I just talk about my life. Feel free to like, subscribe, hype the video, whatever. And thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next one.